I never thought shoveling snow for my neighbors would lead to federal agents showing up at my door. But that's what happens when you cross a petty tyrant with a clipboard and too much time on her hands. My business is built on seasons. In the spring and summer, I run a landscaping company, mowing lawns, building retaining walls, planting gardens. In the fall, it's leaf removal and gutter cleaning. And in the winter, when the Ohio sky turns a permanent shade of bruised gray, I plow snow. I have a heavy-duty pickup with a commercial-grade plow, a couple of powerful snowblowers, and a stockpile of salt. It's hard work, but it's honest, and it keeps my family comfortable. My wife Sophia and I bought our house in the Maple Creek subdivision about 10 years ago. It was exactly what we wanted: a quiet street, decent-sized yards, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves but would lend you a cup of sugar or help you look for a lost dog. The Homeowners Association was, for most of those years, a non-entity. It existed on paper, collected a modest annual fee to cover mowing the common areas and maintaining the little sign at the entrance, and that was about it. The meetings were sparsely attended, usually by a few retirees who enjoyed the coffee and donuts. It was a benign, almost invisible force in our lives. Then, about 3 years ago, Brenda moved in. She bought the corner house, the one with the immaculate rose bushes, and within 6 months, she had somehow become the president of the HOA. Brenda was a woman who seemed to be perpetually wound just a little too tight. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of sprayed blonde hair and a voice that could cut glass. Her husband was a quiet, perpetually startled man who seemed to exist only to carry her shopping bags. Brenda saw the world not as a place to live, but as a series of infractions waiting to be corrected. She didn't just join the HOA, she seized it. She ran for president on a platform of restoring community standards, which was her code for making everyone live by her personal and frankly bizarre set of rules. The changes started small. First, it was a memo about trash cans. They could not be visible from the street except for a 12-hour window on collection day. Then came the rules about lawn ornaments. No gnomes, no pink flamingos, no whimsical whirligigs. Then came the paint color restrictions, dictated by a pre-approved palette of beiges and grays so depressing it made the winter sky look cheerful. Each new rule was delivered in a passive-aggressive monthly newsletter that she typed up herself, filled with thinly veiled jabs at specific residents. Most of us just rolled our eyes and complied. It was easier than fighting. We had jobs, kids, lives to live. Arguing with Brenda about the approved shade of taupe for a mailbox post seemed like a monumental waste of energy. We just wanted to be left alone. That all changed the winter the blizzard hit. The forecasters called it a once-in-a-generation storm, and for once, they weren't exaggerating. It started snowing on a Friday afternoon and didn't stop for 36 hours. When we woke up on Sunday morning, the world was silent and buried under nearly 3 feet of heavy, wet snow. The city plows wouldn't even attempt to touch residential streets like ours for days. We were completely snowed in. For me, this was just another day at the office. I fired up my truck, the diesel engine rumbling to life in the frozen air, and got to work. I cleared my own driveway first, a long, wide ribbon of blacktop that took the better part of an hour. Then, I did what I always do. I moved across the street to the Henderson's place. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were in their 80s. He had a bad hip, and she had a heart condition. They were sweet people who always had a wave and a smile for everyone. There was no way they could handle this kind of snow. I cleared their driveway and their front walk, making sure there was a safe path to their door. After that, I did a few more houses on the block. The single mom with 2 young kids, the family whose husband was deployed overseas. It was just what you did. It was being a neighbor. I was just finishing up the last pass on the deployed soldier's driveway when I saw her. Brenda. She was standing at the end of her own pristine driveway, which her timid husband was laboriously clearing with a small, inadequate shovel. She was wearing a bright pink snowsuit that made her look like a piece of angry bubblegum. Her arms were crossed, and she was staring at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated rage. I cut the engine on my truck and rolled down the window, the cold air rushing in. "Morning, Brenda," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her voice sharp and brittle in the cold. "You can't do that." I was confused. Do what? Helping out my neighbors? She marched closer, her boots crunching on the packed snow. "You are operating a commercial vehicle for snow removal on residential properties without a contract approved by the association. It is a direct violation of Bylaw 17, Section C, Paragraph 4. I just stared at her. I had never even seen the bylaws, let alone memorized them down to the paragraph. "Brenda, I'm not operating a business here. I'm not charging anyone. This is my personal truck, and these are my friends. I'm just helping them dig out." "It is a commercial-grade plow on a commercial-grade truck," she insisted, pointing a gloved finger at my rig. "That makes it a commercial operation under the HOA's definition. You are creating noise pollution before the approved hours, and you are creating an unfair competitive environment for approved, licensed vendors." This was so absurd, I almost laughed. "Brenda, it's a blizzard. There are no licensed vendors coming down our street for at least 2 days. People need to be able to get out. The Hendersons might need an ambulance. How would it get to their door?" Her face hardened. "The rules are the rules. They exist to maintain order and standards in our community. You will cease this unauthorized activity immediately. Consider this your first and only verbal warning. A written citation, along with a $100 fine, will be posted to your door this afternoon." She then turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, leaving me sitting in my truck, stunned by the sheer, weaponized pettiness of it all. I looked over at Mr. Henderson, who was watching from his front window with a worried expression. I gave him a thumbs up, finished the driveway I was on, and went home, a cold knot of anger tightening in my gut. True to her word, a plastic-sleeved notice was taped to my front door a few hours later. It was an official-looking document, complete with the HOA logo she'd designed herself, detailing my violation and the fine. I took it down, read it, and tossed it in the trash. I figured it was just Brenda being Brenda, an empty threat from a powerless woman who got her kicks from bossing people around. I was wrong. The fines kept coming. A week later, another notice appeared, this one for $200, citing my failure to pay the initial fine. Then came another for improperly stored recreational equipment because my son had left his basketball in the driveway overnight. I tried to be reasonable at first. I wrote a formal letter to the HOA board, which consisted of Brenda and 2 of her cronies, explaining the situation with the snowstorm and requesting the fine be rescinded. I received a response a week later, a terse, condescending letter signed by Brenda, stating that the board had reviewed my appeal and found it without merit. The fine stood. They also informed me that the Hendersons had been fined $50 for procuring unapproved services, which sent a jolt of real fury through me. Targeting me was one thing. Targeting an elderly couple on a fixed income was something else entirely. That's when I knew this wasn't just about rules anymore. This was a personal vendetta. I had defied her, and she was going to make me pay. The conflict started affecting the whole neighborhood. People became nervous. Neighbors who I'd helped for years would now politely decline when I offered to lend a hand, glancing nervously toward Brenda's house. She had managed to poison the well of simple neighborliness that had defined our community for so long. The Hendersons were particularly distressed. Mrs. Henderson had a visiting nurse who came 3 times a week, and the bus for their senior center couldn't navigate the street if it wasn't properly cleared. Brenda's actions weren't just annoying, they were becoming dangerous. I realized I couldn't just ignore this anymore. I called my brother-in-law, a lawyer who specialized in contract law. He wasn't an HOA expert, but he knew his way around legal documents. I explained the whole ridiculous situation. He listened patiently, letting out a low whistle when I told him about the fine levied against the Hendersons. "Okay," he said, "this woman is a classic petty tyrant. You can't reason with them. You have to beat them with the rule book they worship." He advised me to stop communicating with her directly. Everything had to be in writing. He told me to formally request a full, unabridged copy of the HOA bylaws, all meeting minutes from the past 3 years, and a complete, itemized financial statement for the same period. They are legally obligated to provide these to any homeowner, he explained. And start documenting everything. Every notice, every interaction, every passive-aggressive newsletter. Create a paper trail she can't escape. So that's what I did. I sent a certified letter to the HOA, formally requesting the documents. The response was a week of silence, followed by another fine, this time for my lawn being 1/4 of an inch too high. It was clear she was going to stonewall me. Pushed to a breaking point, I decided to do some digging of my own. I started talking to my neighbors, the ones who had been here longer than I had. I spent an afternoon with a man named George, one of the original board members from back when the HOA was just a formality. He told me how Brenda had systematically pushed out anyone who disagreed with her, filling the board with her yes men. He also told me something interesting. The common areas, including a small, wooded patch at the back of the subdivision, were maintained using HOA funds. The contract for lawn care and snow removal for those areas had, for the last 10 years, gone to a local company. But George mentioned that the costs had nearly doubled in the 2 years since Brenda took over. He'd questioned it at a meeting and had been summarily shut down. That was my first real clue. I started looking into the approved vendors Brenda was so fond of. A little bit of online searching revealed that the landscaping company that now held the lucrative HOA contract was owned by Brenda's nephew. The address listed for the business was a post office box in the next town over. It was starting to smell like more than just a power trip. It was starting to smell like fraud. My investigation, however, was about to be short-circuited by an act of malice so profound it took my breath away. Brenda must have sensed that I was getting closer to something, that I wasn't just going to roll over and pay her ridiculous fines. She decided she needed to hit me where it would hurt the most. She decided to go after my wife. Sophia is the love of my life. We met in college, and she is brilliant, kind, and the strongest person I know. She was born in Colombia, but came to the United States with her family when she was 5. She became a citizen when she was 18, graduated top of her class from law school, and now she worked as a prosecutor. Specifically, an assistant United States attorney for the Department of Justice. It wasn't something we advertised. We liked our quiet, private life. Most of our neighbors just knew her as Sophia, the friendly woman with the beautiful garden. One Saturday morning in late spring, Sophia was out in our front yard, tending to her prize-winning roses. She loves gardening. It's her way of de-stressing from a very stressful job. I was inside, cleaning up after breakfast, when I saw Brenda march across her lawn and stop at the edge of our property. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language was aggressive. Sophia remained calm, simply standing up and listening. After a minute, Brenda jabbed a finger in Sophia's direction, spun around, and stalked back to her house. When Sophia came inside, her expression was unreadable. "What was that about?" I asked. She took a deep breath. She told me that the color of my petunias was not on the approved floral list. I blinked. The what list? Apparently, Sophia said, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes, there's an approved floral list. And then she said she was tired of people like you bringing down the standards of this neighborhood and that she was going to do something about it. The rage that filled me was cold and absolute. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice tight. "I told her I would take it under advisement," Sophia replied calmly. But I knew her. Beneath that calm was a core of steel. 2 days later, it happened. We were sitting down to dinner when there was a firm knock on our front door. Not a friendly, neighborly knock. This was official. I opened the door to find 2 men and a woman in dark blue jackets with the letters ICE emblazoned on the back. My heart stopped. They were holding a file, and their faces were grim. "Sir, we're with Immigration and Customs Enforcement," the lead agent said. "We've received an anonymous tip regarding an individual named Sofia Rodriguez residing at this address, alleging she is an undocumented immigrant." I was speechless, utterly frozen with a mixture of shock and fury. I knew with sickening certainty who had made that call. Behind me, Sophia stepped forward. She didn't look angry or scared. She looked professional. "Good evening, agents," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I am Sofia Rodriguez. May I see your identification, please?" The agents, a bit taken aback by her composure, showed her their credentials. Sofia examined them carefully. "Thank you," she said. "Now, what seems to be the problem?" The lead agent repeated the information from the anonymous tip. Sofia listened patiently until he was finished. Then she reached into her purse, which was on the hall table, and pulled out her wallet. She didn't show them her driver's license. She showed them her federal credentials. "I am Assistant United States Attorney Sofia Rodriguez," she stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I work for the Department of Justice, the same department you do. I am a naturalized United States citizen, and I have been for over 20 years. This anonymous tip you received. It constitutes a false report to a federal agency, which, as I'm sure you know, is a felony under Title 18 of the United States Code. I would be very interested in learning the source of that tip, as I believe it was made with malicious intent." The three agents stood on my doorstep, their expressions shifting from professional stoicism to wide-eyed shock. They looked from Sofia's credentials to her face and back again. The lead agent swallowed hard. "Ma'am, we apologize for the intrusion. We are required to follow up on all tips." "I understand you have a protocol to follow," Sofia said, her tone cutting. "And I have a protocol to follow when the law is broken, especially when it's used to harass a federal officer. I will be in contact with your supervisor and the Inspector General's office in the morning to ensure this matter is investigated thoroughly. Now, if you'll excuse us, my husband and I were about to have our dinner." She calmly closed the door, leaving the three agents standing on our porch in stunned silence. That was the moment the war ended and the execution began. Brenda had no idea what she had just done. She hadn't just poked the bear, she'd tried to deport it, not knowing the bear was a federal prosecutor with a deep and abiding respect for the letter of the law. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of quiet, efficient activity. Sofia made a few phone calls. Men in dark suits who were definitely not from the HOA came and went from our house. A special emergency meeting of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association was called for Wednesday evening. The notice, posted on the community bulletin board, cited urgent matters of community governance and financial integrity. The entire neighborhood was buzzing. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. Brenda, in her hubris, likely thought this was her moment of triumph, the public forum where she would finally put me in my place and get the board to approve a lien on our house for the unpaid, illegitimate fines. The meeting was held in the small clubhouse by the community pool. The room was packed. Usually, these meetings drew a dozen people at most. Tonight, there were over 100. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls. The air was thick with anticipation. Brenda sat at the head table, flanked by her two board cronies, looking smug and powerful. She opened the meeting with her usual condescending drone, reviewing minutes and making announcements about lawn care schedules. Then she got to the main event. "Under new business," she announced, a triumphant glint in her eye, "we have the matter of the persistent and egregious violations by the resident at 112 Oak Street." That was me. Despite multiple warnings and fines totaling over $1,000, this resident has refused to comply with community standards. Therefore, the board proposes a motion to place a lien on the property. Before she could ask for a second, I stood up. "I'd like to address the board and my neighbors before you vote on that motion," I said, my voice ringing out in the silent room. Brenda glared at me. "You are out of order." "I don't think I am," I replied calmly. "I think every homeowner here deserves to know exactly what our HOA president has been doing with our money and her authority." I walked to the front of the room, holding a stack of papers. For the past 2 years, our HOA fees have paid over $40,000 to a company called Prestige Landscape Solutions for grounds maintenance. This company is owned by Brenda's nephew. It is not licensed, not insured, and consists of one man with a push mower. I have here invoices he submitted for services never rendered, including emergency tree removal on a day when it was sunny and 70 degrees. A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's face went from smug to pale. "Those are lies, slander," she screeched. "Oh, it gets better," I continued, my voice steady. When Brenda's attempts to intimidate my family with bogus fines failed, she decided to escalate. She decided to use the power of the federal government as her own personal weapon. At that moment, the back doors of the clubhouse opened. Sophia walked in. She was not alone. She was flanked by two grim-faced men in dark suits. They didn't look like neighbors. They looked like they stepped out of a movie about federal agents. Sophia walked to the front of the room and stood beside me. She looked directly at Brenda, whose face had now turned the color of ash. "My name is Sofia Rodriguez," she said, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. 2 nights ago, our HOA president, Brenda Miller, placed a call to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In that call, she knowingly and falsely reported me as an undocumented immigrant, for the sole purpose of harassing and intimidating my family. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence that followed was absolute. "As it happens," Sophia continued, "I am a citizen of the United States. I am also an assistant United States attorney. Making a false report to a federal agency is a felony. Using that report in an attempt to intimidate a federal officer in retaliation for them resisting your racketeering scheme." She let the words hang in the air. "Well, that adds a few more charges to the list." Brenda was sputtering, trying to form words, but only noise came out. Her 2 cronies on the board looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. One of them slowly began pushing his chair away from her. The 2 men in suits stepped forward. One of them addressed Brenda in a quiet, firm voice. "Brenda Miller, we are from the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. We need you to come with us to answer some questions." Brenda's authority didn't just crumble. It was utterly annihilated in a single, spectacular moment of public humiliation. She was escorted from the room, a bewildered, defeated woman who had finally been crushed under the weight of her own malice. In the aftermath, everything unraveled for her. The investigation by the Inspector General uncovered the full extent of her corruption. She had been embezzling from the HOA for years, using the fake landscaping invoices to funnel money to her nephew, which she then split with him. She was charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and most seriously, making false statements to a federal agency and attempting to intimidate a federal officer. Faced with an ironclad case put together by the very department my wife worked for, she pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her house went up for sale a month later to cover her legal fees and the restitution. She and her startled husband simply disappeared. The HOA was dissolved by a unanimous vote of the homeowners. We started over. A new, much simpler neighborhood association was formed, with transparent rules and a board made up of reasonable people. All the fines Brenda had levied were declared null and void. The Hendersons got a personal written apology from the new board, and the money they had paid in fines was returned to them, with interest. I was asked to serve on the new board, but I politely declined. I wasn't a politician. I was a landscaper. I did, however, agree to consult on a new, fair contract for grounds maintenance, which we awarded to a legitimate local company at half the price Brenda had been paying. A couple of years have passed since then. The neighborhood is better than it ever was. The quiet cooperation has returned. People help each other out again. The gnomes and pink flamingos have slowly reappeared on lawns, small flags of freedom from Brenda's tyrannical reign. Property values have gone up, and the oppressive atmosphere is gone, replaced by a sense of genuine community that was forged in the fire of her downfall. One day last fall, I was at the grocery store when I saw her. It was Brenda. She had served her time and was out. She looked smaller, diminished. Her hair was no longer a perfect blonde helmet. It was gray and thinning. She saw me, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old hate in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else, shame. She looked away and hurried down another aisle. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt a quiet sense of pity. She had been given a little bit of power, and instead of using it to build something good, she had used it to tear people down, and in the end, had only succeeded in destroying herself. The moral of the story, I suppose, is about the corrosive nature of petty power. It's about how people who feel small in their own lives will grasp at any scrap of authority to make themselves feel big, often by making others feel smaller. But it's also a story about community. When we finally stood together, we were stronger than she ever was. It's a reminder that bullies, whether on the playground or in an HOA meeting, only have the power you give them. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, the person they choose to bully turns out to be a federal prosecutor who knows exactly how to tear their whole world down, one perfectly cited statute at a time. Now, when a big snowstorm is in the forecast, I still fire up my plow. I clear my driveway, then I clear the Hendersons and a few others. The difference is, now I send an invoice to the new HOA and they pay it promptly, with a note at the bottom that just says, "Thank you, neighbor." And that feels like the best kind of victory.